Greetings to all of you on this third Sunday of Easter. It still seems so very strange that we have not been physically together as a parish community in the Easter season. I have heard from many of you how anxious you are for the return, to be able to return to Mass, and I want you to know how very anxious I am to have you all back at Mass and to be able to pray together as a community physically present. I'll continue, though, to pray for all of you and to lift you up at the altar of the Lord each time that I offer the holy sacrifice of the Mass. Now, before I get too far into this reflection for this third Sunday of Easter, you know the drill. If you have not yet looked at the readings, go ahead, pause the video, and look them up. If you need a place to find them, you can go to usccb.org. The gospel is that familiar story of the two disciples on the road to Emmaus. They're walking along, discussing all the things that had occurred. So far, in many ways, I think we can relate to this experience. Of course, our discussions these days might not be as we walk along the road, unless we're 6 feet apart, but over phone calls, text messages, emails, angry comments on social media or other places, a Zoom meeting, or perhaps even, God forbid, those who live in our own house. But we're trying to process this experience much the same way that those two disciples on the road did. We're trying to process our experience of these last few weeks. And we're trying to figure out what's next. I think ultimately that's what those two disciples were attempting to do. They wanted to understand what they had experienced, and then they wanted to figure out what was going to come next for them. Really, don't we all struggle with that unknown, the question of the unknown? As they start their conversation with Jesus, without realizing that it is in fact Jesus, they tell him about what has occurred and said, and we were hoping that he would be the one to redeem Israel, which is, of course, exactly what Jesus had just done. They had just placed an entirely different set of expectations on how Jesus was going to do this and how he was going to accomplish it and what it was going to look like. And they weren't the only ones to do that. And when Jesus responds to them, he says, "Oh, how foolish you are. Was it not necessary for the Christ that the Christ should suffer these things and enter into his glory?" And from that point on, he begins to open up for them the meaning of sacred scriptures. When they finally recognize that it's Jesus and realize that it's him in the breaking of the bread, they even ask the question, were not our hearts burning within us? And then they returned quickly to Jerusalem to share their experience with the other disciples, and they found great joy amongst them because Jesus had appeared to Peter already as well. It's natural for us to want to know what is next. I think there's a very human and real element of that. I confess that I am wanting to know what's next and when. But as we continue to struggle with those questions and the questions that arise for us as we look forward, as we continue to search for understanding, perhaps we could look at the lesson of these two disciples. Jesus was standing right there with them on the road. He walked with them into Emmaus. He helped them understand the meaning of Scripture and why the things that happened to Jesus did and what that meant for Jesus as the Christ and for Israel. He shared with them the blessing of the bread and at the moment of rediscovery of Jesus and the breaking of the bread, his grace, his love, and his presence burned in their hearts. How will we come to recognize the many ways that Jesus is accompanying us along the road? What lessons are we going to take with us as we emerge from this experience? How will we grow in God's grace along the way? The challenges that we face are real. The difficulties that we see in the world around us are real. But so are the opportunities that we have at this particular moment in our lives as people of faith. Opportunities to grow in faith, opportunities to learn and to share, opportunities to be opened up in new ways to the sacred scriptures. May we not lose sight of our ultimate goal, of that ultimate goal we're called to in union with Jesus, and truly embrace this moment and in our call of discipleship, when we too may see the Lord and see him more clearly as he's made known to us in many ways, and ultimately to come once again to share in this gift of the Lord's presence in the Eucharist as he's made known to us in the breaking of bread.